mostly for my pleasure. Hi, Nordic.js. I feel extremely privileged to be here. In the first place, this is my first time in Sweden, and I'm even more privileged to be here to close this great conference. So I'd like to start with a trigger warning, because this talk includes mentions of harassment and depiction of discussion of discriminatory attitudes and actions. So if at any point you feel uncomfortable with the content or it upsets you, please feel free to leave and take care of yourself. I remember the day my parents bought the first PC quite profoundly. And I can still recall the sounds that we've just heard, the little beeps and bops of a dial-up modem connecting me to this magical platform of the internet. And I found a place where I could belong, with many other individuals who were expressing themselves and learning and creating and sharing and being so passionate. And I was instantly hooked on the wonders of that platform. But today feels different. The internet is growing very fast, exponentially, and so are the platforms that you choose to gather on. Unfortunately, compared to technology, which is moving very rapidly, the humanity is progressing quite slowly. And the interests of so-called tech leaders are often very different from what we need as a community. Their motivation is often commercial. And it's the profit curves, rather than prosperity and the health of community, are driving their vision of success and their vision of what they should be doing. So the platforms we and I was so excited about is dehumanizing us and urging us to fit into those stereotypical and often oppressive societal norms. So it's easy to feel disconnected and detached and lonely. And willingly or not being able to share who we really are and bring our true selves to the table. So more often than not, it's easy that we feel that we don't belong. There is no room for us. We don't belong. I don't belong. And humans always had this inherent need to gather and to coexist in tribes. Even in ancient history, humans formed groups and tribes to increase their chances of survival. But nowadays, that feeling of belongingness is something different, is a very prominent basic need that's there not because we need to survive, not for survival. Because group membership can boost our self-esteem, help us strengthen our identity, and ensure that we have moral support that we need. So the desire to maintain those social bonds is very crucial for our well-being. So being in a community makes us feel really good. It's very natural for us as humans. Peter Block is an expert in civic engagement and building communities, and he describes the underlying reason for why we don't feel like we belong. Our communities are separated into silos. They're a collection of institutions and programs operating near one another, but not overlapping or touching. This is important to understand because this dividedness that makes it so difficult to create a more positive or alternative future. So if belonging has such a great effect on our work and our lives, why are we divided? Why are we feeling that way? And I think one of the reasons lies in misunderstanding what communities are and what being in a community means. Because communities are much more than shared interests and commonality. Communities should be platforms for belonging for all of us. And we are in a community when we feel comfortable expressing ourselves, but we are also aware of our co-ownership of that group and our responsibilities to that group. So there is accountability for nurturing the community and fostering the same feeling that we have, that feeling of safety, amongst others. So to me, it becomes quickly very evident that diversity and inclusion is something that's necessary for us to build meaningful platforms together on. So I'd like to talk about diversity and inclusion a little bit. There are two different concepts, but they're often lumped together, and a lot of people get confused about what they mean. I really like this metaphor by Verena Myers. Diversity is being invited to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance. Diversity encompasses complex differences and similarities between people, such as gender, race, status, ability, religion, or many more aspects. It means that we understand that each person is different and unique, and recognizing those differences. It allows us to explore those differences in a very positive and nurturing environment. But diversity on its own will not give us the results that we want, this welcoming, nurturing community that we're after. That's where inclusion comes in. Because inclusion is that sense of belonging that engages all individuals and enables them to function at full capacity. It makes the voices of underrepresented groups heard and impactful, because there's a culture enabling that to happen. But there's more. There's equity that puts diversity and inclusion in practice, because it requires a set of informed policies and practices that are intentionally designed. And there are designers here and developers as well, people who are creators. So policies and practices that are designed to promote opportunity and rectify those disparities between people. And it's necessary to have people who are positioned and able to implement those practices effectively. So we have diversity, inclusion, and equity. And they are all fighting against exclusion, which takes the form of discrimination that denies full access to rights, opportunities, and resources that are normally accessible to others. And to me, exclusion breeds something that's social detachment, and we cannot possibly build a better future if we are detached. It would be impossible for us to build a better community, and it doesn't matter if it's JavaScript design or any other framework, or is it programming or something completely different. We can't do that if even a single person is feeling excluded. And I feel like this is the dividedness that Peter Block was mentioning, and we have to overcome this together. So is our tech industry diverse and inclusive? What is the state of tech? Astra Taylor said, "We have somehow deceived ourselves into believing that this state of insecurity and inequity is a form of liberation. While the internet creates space for many voices, the openness of the web reflects and even amplifies real-world inequities as often as it ameliorates them." Women take up 40 to 60% jobs worldwide. In our industry, only 26% of women are doing software engineering. For Black women, it's 3%. This is horrifying. Only 6% of Fortune 500 companies' chief executives are women. 98% of VCs are white or Asian males. And these statistics are even worse for people of color. To make this worse, women are experiencing between 21 to 29% pay gap, and it depends on the role. So we are outnumbered and underpaid. But surviving in tech is much more than dealing with loneliness and lack of role models, not working with other women. 60% of women reported unwanted sexual advances. And a lot of those stories never see the light of the day, but the ones that we have seen are painting quite a mortifying picture of the tech industry and culture. Harassed by coworkers, supervisors, blackmailed by VCs, women and other marginalized groups are fleeing the industry and suffer in silence. They retreat from the world of technology not because they want to, but because they have to. But a few really great individuals stick around, like Ellen Pao or Sarah Fowler, and they speak up, risking their careers and their mental health to try to progress this industry that we are in. 78% of tech employees reported experiencing some form of unfair behavior. 30% of women of color were passed over for a promotion, which is twice as much in the tech industry than any other industry. Women rarely advance in senior roles. Only 8% of tech employees never experience gendered bias. And the turnover cost for staff is creeping at $16 billion for many other reasons than the reasons that I've just mentioned. And the word of open source is not any better. According to GitHub's open source survey, staggering 95% of contributors in open source are male. And the low percentage of women who are contributing to open source will experience behaviors such as inappropriate content, stereotypical stereotyping, or unwanted sexual advances. And those underrepresented groups that are missing in open source are really interested in creating a safe, welcoming platform and codifying behavioral expectations through code of conducts and trying to make open source better for all of us. But unfortunately, they self-select themselves out because the world of open source is so dominated by men and it's so competitive. So why would they try? We are turning a blind eye at systemic issues that we are facing as humanity, as the tech industry as well. 40% of men are fed up hearing about problems in the tech community. And this is getting worse. And oftentimes the tech industry is becoming a safe harbor only for one type of demographic, which is white men. And our communities are marketing behaviors that just propagate fear and exclusion. So my question is, what can we do about this today? I want to talk about allyship. Ellen Pao said, "We are at a crossroads. We can take the hard road to reforming our industry through innovation and accountability, or continue with the status quo after a moment of self-flagellation." And the accountability for future starts with every one of us, every single person in this room. Our industry has no culture stewards, and the legislation only reaches so far and mostly considers workplace, not the community, not other platforms where we gather. And we glorify our leaders, trusting that they're the only people to bring us change. And this deeply patriarchal agenda limits our capacity for improvement. Someone has to pick up the gauntlet. And that someone is you and me. There are no prerequisites, no reach or exposure necessary to do this. Change begins here, and the community won't approve without continuous commitment from all of us. There is no room for silent bystanders, and there's no room for looking away. So before I dig deeper into actionable advice about what we can do to progress our industry and progress our community, I would like to talk about allyship. And it's a concept that ties this together in a very great way. Being an ally is an ongoing process of unlearning and re-evaluating. And Mia Mackenzie puts it in a really, really great way. She says, it's a way of living life without reinforcing oppressive behaviors we are claiming to be against. And allyship is a journey, not an identity. And it's not defined by us, but it's defined by people that we choose to ally ourselves with. It's genuine interest in challenging the status quo. So how can we do this? First step is education. Thousands of otherwise decent people are persuaded to go along with an unfair system because changing it seems like too much bother. We're all born and raised with a set of biases and stereotypes and beliefs. But to see past them, we have to commit to an ongoing act of introspection, reflection, and learning. And it is a very laborious process, and it's very demanding. And you will find yourself feeling uncomfortable and challenged. But the more intense those feelings get, it probably means that you're on the right track. It is really important to understand the repercussions and even more so the causes of inclusion and diversity in our industry. Ignorance is part of oppression. Do not expect members of underrepresented groups to coach you and tell you what to do, because those people are already struggling. They're resisting abuse on a daily basis. It is our responsibility to educate ourselves, to read about intersectional feminism. And there are plenty of materials available out there. You can start with online resources such as Model View Culture, Geek Feminism Wiki, Everyday Feminism, Guide to Allyship, or Project Include. You can read amazing books like Men Explain Things to Me, or Unspeakable Things, or We Should All Be Feminists, or Black Girl Dangerous. And there are many others. These are only a very few examples. Consider getting a workshop, an ally workshop, or an unconscious bias workshop. If you can't spend the money yourself, maybe try to get your employer to run one. Second step is listening. So reading and educating ourselves might give us a great knowledge base, but it cannot possibly replace listening to real stories of underrepresented groups. So honestly, we should just shut up and listen. And listening, to me, lies at the core of allyship, because it requires this conscious effort to honestly shut up and take the time to hear the stories carefully, to accept how challenging and confronting they are to our own bias and prejudice. And we have to trust those stories and listen to them. Because the more diverse accounts we're exposed to, the more likely we are to understand the people who we are aligning ourselves with. We begin to understand what obstacles they are facing, what experiences they have. So we have to seek out those stories. But sharing them is difficult. So make sure that it's not an extremely difficult process for them, and make sure to respect their boundaries and create a safe space for them to do so. The internet is experienced completely differently by people who are visibly identifiable as a marginalized group, race, or gender. It's a nastier, more exhausting internet, one that gets even nastier and even more exhausting as intersections stack up. First step is understanding privilege. So privilege is a set of unearned benefits that come with such identity traits like race, status, ability, to name a few examples. It's unavoidable and is omnipresent. We all have privilege. And privilege is opposite of oppression, but the two can coexist. So it's entirely possible to be a member of an underrepresented group and still experience privilege in some way or another. Privilege symbolizes the power over the oppressed. It is our responsibility to find our privilege, to recognize it, identify it. Keep a list if we need to remember it. Make it transparent and act on it. We shouldn't be retreating into the safety net of our privilege, because there are so many people out there who don't have that comfort, don't have that luxury. Fourth step is combating unconscious bias. So unconscious and implicit biases are shortcuts that our brains take in processing information. It happens outside of our awareness, and we're all guilty of bias. It can prevent us from making very objective decisions. especially in the workplace or education. It can limit our career prospects or someone else's career prospects. Racial and gender bias is widespread. We implicitly prefer men in position of authority, and we choose people who are similar to others. This is bias. It's entirely possible to combat that bias, though. We need to make our bias conscious, question our first impressions, try to justify our decisions that we are making, or try to make them collectively, as it's easier to keep each other in check rather than do it alone. We have to empower other people to call out on unconscious bias. The fifth step is organizing. Each year, thousands of events will be run, from casual meetups, workshops, conferences with amazing budgets and scale like this one. But the involvement in any size of an event comes with responsibility to not only ensure a safe and inclusive platform for attendees, speakers, and staff, but also calls for this increased commitment to diversity. It's our responsibility as organizers to set the tone and expectations for the industry as a whole. So we need to have mechanisms like enforceable code of conduct, outlining unacceptable behaviors. This has to be a standard. Accessibility and diversity statements are a must for fostering inclusion. And we have to have diversity that goes further than gender ratios. We need to help facilitate events for marginalized people in tech. Next step is donating and giving. Organizations that are focusing on diversity and inclusion work are oftentimes very understaffed and underpaid. And frequently those efforts start as side projects, but manage to have a tremendous, very positive impact on not only marginalized groups, but the industry as a whole. So donate funds to Women Who Code, Girl Develop It, Black Girls Code, Outreachy, or anything that's local to you wherever you are. Financially support individuals that are trying to better diversity and inclusion in tech. Buy conference diversity tickets. If it's not feasible, donate your time, mentor someone, run a workshop for free, or convince your employers to donate to those diversity and inclusion initiatives. Diversify and amplify. So as members of tech industry, we're quite connected, especially on social media. Unfortunately, it's very easy to end with this quite boring and quite homogeneous audience. It's easier than you think. While it's harder to diversify who is following you, it's entirely up to you to decide who you're amplifying. So it's crucial to choose to amplify the voices of those without privilege, because that increases chances of their work being seen, their stories being seen by many. Consciously follow more people who are different than you, who have different opinions, different backgrounds. Mindfully create a platform for them to share and thrive. It is up to you to decide what to amplify, so make those decisions consciously. And lastly, take responsibility. So no matter how hard we try, we're only humans. We will make mistakes. We'll write off inappropriate behavior as a joke. We'll act defensively. We will lash out at someone when someone was calling us out on our wrongdoing. It's in human nature. It's completely fine. We'll all do it. But learning how to deal with those mistakes is one of the foundations of being an ally. As that Jamie Ute puts it, allies listen, apologize, act accountably, and act differently going forward. So it's necessary to recognize and accept that we've made a mistake. We should avoid the temptation to be dismissive or aggressive. Apologize sincerely and take proactive steps to not have the same behavior in the future. We shouldn't be erasing the tracks and traces of what we have done to evade responsibility, because in all fairness, the internet is great at remembering things in perpetuity. So we need to own up to our mistakes. So this is the list of the steps that we can take to start being allies today. And there are just a few starting points. But we need to educate ourselves, listen, understand what privilege is, fight against unconscious bias, organize better, donate our time or money, diversify, practice empathy, show up every day and take responsibility. This is our responsibility. So what is the future? What does the future bring? Sustainable transformation is constructed in those places where citizens choose to come together to produce a desired future. The tech choices that we are making today and the software that we are creating won't matter in a span of a few years from now. And the only thing that will prevail is the impact that we had on other people. Software is not the cure for all of the problems humanity is facing, no matter what tech leaders want you to believe. People are the most important ingredient of our communities, and we cannot succeed in having a better future if we are perpetuating abusive exclusion. So what I really want you to do is to foster a better platform for everyone to thrive on. People first. All types of people. I would like to leave you with a question. What are you doing for others? Thank you.